This is the Vibrant Christian Living Podcast, Episode 2. Welcome to the Vibrant Christian Living Podcast, a place for practical ideas and powerful spiritual inspiration for women like you who want to overcome their obstacles, discover their true potential, and find lasting joy and significance through a relationship with Christ. I'm your host, Alicia Michelle, and I'm so excited to encourage you on how you can live the full, vibrant life that God has planned for you, the life that you were meant to live. So find a cozy spot and let's get started on today's episode. Hey everyone, it's Alicia Michelle with the Vibrant Christian Living Podcast. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. Today's question is something that really hits at the core of who we all are, and it also coincides with something that is just so common in our modern world. And it's this question of survival versus thriving. So do you feel like you're just surviving in your day, that you're not thriving, you're not able to get ahead, like you're just getting through the week, like you're just like living for the weekend, like the days, the weeks, even the years are just kind of passing by? Like we, as I'm recording this episode, we just finished with Christmas and the holidays, and it's really easy for life to just feel like, okay, it's another Christmas and here we are back again in January, and then it'll be Valentine's Day and then Easter. And it just feels like this never ending treadmill if we don't have purpose and direction. And sometimes that feeling leads us to have that concept of there's more out of life, right? We know there's got to be more, just this deep longing, but we have no idea how to get there because we feel like I'm doing everything I can to just keep up. What am I supposed to do? What is life really supposed to be about? If you've ever felt like that, I want to tell you, first of all, you are not alone. And secondly, this episode, I pray, will be a huge encouragement to you because yes, I want to tell you right now that you were called to greater things. And we're going to talk about what survival mode is and how that survival mode itself can be an amazing invitation to find that life of fulfillment, that life of peace and greater purpose that you were created to enjoy. First of all, why do so many of us feel like this? I mean, if you were to talk to a friend, I don't know if this has happened to you just even in the last week, but I'm telling you, like every person that I run into, every mom, and I'm totally guilty of this too, but we say to each other, oh, how you doing? Oh, life has been what? Busy, right? We all say it. We're like, oh, things have just been so busy, this and this and this and this, and we could just list all of our things. And I was thinking about this the other day, like that is something that people have always been busy, right? But even in the last 5 to 10 years, I've noticed that people say that all the time. It used to just be like we had a busy season or this happened or that happened. But now it's like every time you run into somebody, they're all just busy. And it's like that is where I think a lot of this problem is coming because we're just rushing from one place to another and there's no margin, there's no overflow. And so we become just stuck in this empty living, these empty cycles. And I think the reasons why we're so busy is because we have so many good options for how to spend our time, right? And it's almost overwhelming, all the choices that we have, especially if we live in the US or in the Western society where there's always something to do. You know, you can always go get involved with some sport or some activity or call a friend. Or of course, there's always the internet that's there and there's social media and there's tasks to do, there's people to take care of. There's, the list just is on. And we feel like we can never keep up with it. And the other part too is that we're bombarded with information, right? I mean, everywhere we go, there's ads, there's people talking to us, there's noise. And we were not created to be in a state of continual noise and chaos. That's not how God created our bodies. And so when we're in those states, it really can affect us emotionally and really cause us to shut down. So I feel like sometimes I get to those places where I'm just done. And I will tell my husband, okay, I am like an overstimulated toddler. That's like how I describe it to him. And he knows what I'm talking about when I say that. And I just know that I have to go somewhere and just be quiet, close the door, and just like, let me have silence. That's what gets me out of it. But I mention that because when we are stuck in that mode perpetually, day after day after day after day, it becomes so familiar that we even forget that there is life outside of just that chaos, that everyday living. And so the problem is that survival mode is okay for these short-term stints, but we weren't made to live in that mode forever. And it wasn't made to be our purpose, that our purpose is so much greater than that. And in fact, we were called to step out of everyday living and into God's amazing purposes and plans. Jesus says, come, follow me. He calls men, just everyday men like Matthew and John, out of what they were doing. I think of Matthew just sitting on the side of the lake or the river and fishing and getting the fish, as he was a fisherman. And for Jesus to come by and say, come follow me. It's like calling you from your everyday, like he calls us, out of our everyday into the extraordinary. That is what it means to have a relationship with God. That is what it really means to live a vibrant life. I get emails every day from women who share with me some really difficult things. And most of the time, the theme that I hear over and over is that they feel just run over and burnt out by life's demands, right? And I know that this is very concerning and that I know that a lot of people talk about this, but honestly, I see that as a really great opportunity, because when we are in these places where there is just, we're just running, it's an opportunity for us to recognize what's really going on, right? When we're hurt, when we're lacking, that is the time when we are most open and receptive for God to speak to us. So it's pretty cool. And so the thing is we have to be able to make this distinction, right? When we're in these survival type lifestyles, we either do one of two things. So number one, we either continue to just dig deeper into our survival lifestyles. We build props up for ourselves that kind of keep it going, right? We're numbing ourselves out. We're looking for escapes, and we push ourselves harder, and we just kind of ignore what's going on inside. So when we do that, we choose that option, eventually we're either going to break or we're going to numb ourselves to the point that we just deaden ourselves to the truth that there is more. We just closed ourselves off. We've just almost, sealed our mind to the fact that this is all that there is. And it's so sad because we do meet these people, right? You probably know these people, and maybe you might even feel that way, that you're just closed off. And of course, there's always hope. There's always regeneration. There's always the ability to come out of that. But that's the danger that we face, is that if we continue to just keep pushing through in a survival mindset, that it does affect us. It deadens those parts of us. The second option that we can do is that we can begin to express and experience and admit to our discomfort, right? And that's something, again, that's not popular. We're taught over and over subconsciously that if there is pain in our life, we should be running from it. We should be taking a pill to get rid of it, that we don't have time for it, that it's not helpful. But in reality, pain has a purpose, doesn't it? Pain is harder to walk on. It's harder to recognize. I don't like my life the way it is. It's harder to say, this isn't, I don't like this. I want to be different. But this is the path that leads us to the greater place we want to go. It's that discomfort that causes us to change. I've learned through coaching that there's two ways that people change. It's either they change because of pain in their life, or they change because of passion of where they want to go. And so in this case, it would be pain, that they don't want to live in this lifestyle anymore. And so when we decide, I'm tired of living this route, predictable, empty, survival type lifestyle, and I want to look for more, that's when I feel that opportunity is best utilized for when we're stuck in survival mode, because that is the place that God says, yes, finally, I want to show you. I want to show you what I can do, right? And this is what happened to me at age 19. I hadn't grown up going to church. I was raised with great parents, moral household, things like that, but was never told about God in terms of a relationship with Christ, and never went to church. And so when I turned 19, I ended up going away to school to the University of Missouri, and had a lot of things that I was feeling. I had grown up in a society where I was surrounded by people who pretty much had whatever they wanted. And we weren't rich by any stretch, but we definitely were comfortable, and the people around me were comfortable. And I noticed that no matter what I had, or the people around me had, it was never enough. I also noticed that I had this desire, this ache inside of me to be loved. And that ache was never filled by a boyfriend. And that was what I continued to try to seek, was a romantic relationship. And yet I just felt empty. And I was also incredibly driven. And I still have to deal with the driven side of myself. which again, I will definitely share more about in a future episode because there's a lot there. And I know a lot of you struggle with that as well. But I was very driven. I was very perfectionistic. I was very much basing my self-worth on my accomplishments and my achievements. And I had gotten good grades, been captain of this, captain of that. And so that's where I was. And yet I was this empty, just broken girl, really, as I went away to college. And that was exactly what God wanted to do with me. I was in a survival mode where that was what I had done to get by and to be liked and to have self-worth. But God had said to me, there's more, right? And make a long story short, I was exposed to a group of Christians who showed me that there was this deeper side of life, that they had this connection with God that I had never experienced. And they had a purpose and a passion and a reason for living that had nothing to do with their grades or their future career, or if they had a boyfriend. They had this peace that I had never seen before. I had never experienced anything like that, and I desperately wanted it. So for me, coming to Christ was at this time of just survival mode. It was that time when God said to me, your life is empty. Your life has so much more to it. Let me show you what that can be. I'd felt that hole in my heart. And of course, there's a very famous quote, and some people have attributed it to Pascal and others have kind of questioned it, whether it's Pascal or not, but that we were born with a God-shaped vacuum in our heart. And the concept behind that basically is that there's this hole in all of us that nothing of this world can fulfill. And I believe that the real question of our age and of every age is, what are you going to do about that hole in your heart? Are you going to try to fill it with things? Are you going to try to fill it with relationships, with achievement, with money, with sex, with whatever? Food. I mean, gosh, all these things. What are we going to try to fill it with? And when we're in survival mode, it's the perfect chance to say, you know what? I see that the things that I'm trying to fill it with, even though they may be good things, that there's this emptiness. And even, like I said, I went through that when I was 19, when I came to know Christ. But I know, and you've probably experienced this too, if you are a Christian right now, that you have other periods where you just get busy and where life just overflows you, and you have to go back to, what is my purpose? What is my calling outside of what I'm doing right now every day? And that happens too when we're going through these new stages, when we become a mom for the first time, when we get married, when we start a new job, or when we have a career at all, when we move to a new house. We're kind of put in these new situations where we're pushed to survive, to get through that part. But we're also asking ourselves, is this it? And who am I in this place? And God is always there and ready to answer us and to say, your purpose is my purpose. And let me show you what that greater purpose is. And I feel in my heart like these little pinches in my spirit. That's kind of the only way I can describe it. When he puts me in these places where I feel empty, like my life has kind of slipped back into empty living. And it's that place where in the Chronicles of Narnia, Aslan, the lion, he says further up and further in, And so it's like that place where God is challenging me. There's more, let's go and let's discover it. And we're all created for more. And he uses these situations, again, as a love song, like a siren calling to him. But we have the choice of what we're going to do with these situations. Will we numb ourselves to it and just keep pushing through? Or are we going to press into them and ask the difficult questions, ask the questions that will lead us, that are painful, but that will lead us to a different place, a better place, that will show us what we're really made for, what God put us on this planet for? Because I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that God made you and that he put you on this planet for a purpose. Isn't that awesome? That's exciting, isn't it? And that purpose is going to shift in every season that you go through, but that there is a wonderful part that you get to play in history, in his story, the story of his people, the story of humankind from the beginning. You were born at this point in history. You were given your looks and your personality and your passions and your talents. All of those things have a reason and a purpose. And I encourage you, whether you're struggling with survival type living or not, to really always keep in mind what that purpose could be. Some verses that talk about this, there's some really amazing scriptures. One that you probably have heard before, but it bears listening to. It's Jeremiah 29, verses 10 to 14. So verse 11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." And then there's this second part that a lot of us maybe don't read or haven't heard before, but it's such a critical part of it. It says, "Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You'll seek me and find me when you seek me with all of your heart." And he says, "I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I've banished you, and I will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile." Now, of course, when he's talking about banishment and exile, that's something that was prophetic of happening with the Israelite people at this time. But this concept of God having plans for each one of us that are good, prospering us, right? Good things. They're not to hurt us. And they're plans to have a hope, a future, a good plan for us. And our task is what he talks about in verse 12. Call on him, come and pray to him, and he'll hear us. And we find him when we seek him with all our hearts. That's verse 13. Beautiful promises that are so important to remember when we're going through these times. And it's this greater assurance that even when we're in brokenness, even when we feel like we're living an empty living, he is calling us to a greater purpose. So how do we get there, right? How do we get to that? I kind of alluded to it in that verse, but I want to talk about that more specifically, how we can catch God's vision for more and to boldly pursue it. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to mention. First, I want to talk about the stages of faith. So there's a theoretical model called the stages of faith, and it talks about how we each move, how we can move through different levels of faith as we grow and get to know ourselves in a spiritual way. And not everybody goes all the way through the levels of faith, of course, but it's a barometer. It's a way for us to understand where we are spiritually in our walk and how we may be moving from one stage to another. It's a coaching thing that I use. So it's what's interesting and why I mention it here is that there's something called stage 2 faith. And this is a faith where it's something, a religion, so to speak. It's just something that God is something that is just like part of us in the same way, like we live in this town, we go to church on Sunday. It's like a box that we're checking. It's not really anything that greatly impacts us per se. It's there. And this kind of living, again, going back to being wanting more, is a check for those of us who may be stuck in that place, because a majority of our society is, if they do call themselves Christian or consider themselves spiritual, are stuck in this place of just, I go to church, or maybe they don't even go to church. They just kind of know God exists, but they're not really seeking him. They're not really moving forward towards that. And that's where we can get to that next level, is when we move forward, like it says in that Jeremiah verse. These are invitations when we have these obstacles in our lives, when there's difficulties. There will be many episodes where we're going to be talking about difficulties and going through difficulties, since overcoming obstacles is a big part of this podcast and a part of my ministry online. But when we have that longing in our hearts, it is a call from God. But the thing is that it takes action on our part. We can't just sit back and say, okay, whatever, God, just bring it. Our pastor described it this weekend in a sermon he was preaching. He said, it's not like we can sit back in a lounge chair and just say, all right, Lord, just bring me to the promised land. Just take me wherever. It's like when we want to go to that next stage and have more in our life, it requires us to ask those deep questions, like we said, and to move forward and to be willing to do the work that has to be there. It requires, of course, faith. It requires knowing what he can do, believing what he can do, and then moving forward from there. There's an amazing story in the book of Numbers, chapter 13, that speaks of the Israelite people when, after they had gone through the Red Sea, Moses had led them into the desert obviously by God leading them. And God was now calling them to a greater purpose. They'd been settled in the desert. They'd been there a while, kind of like us in our lives, like we'd been settled here a while. But now he's saying, look, I want to take you to the promised land. This is where I want to take you. This is the greater vision I have for you. And so he says, take a group of men and go north into this specific area and to begin to explore that area and have these guys spy out the land, come back and give the people a report of what's there. And then I want you to move forward and move into this land. So they send a group of men up there, and for 40 days, the men explore the land. Then the men come back and they give a report that yes, this is a wonderful land. There's this beautiful scenery. It's lush. It produces all of this produce. The men bring back this big grapevine that was so heavy that they had took 2 men to carry it back. That's amazing to me. And it's just beautiful. It's wonderful. But there's this huge but attached to it, right? But there's these tribes that are incredibly powerful. There's these people that are strong and scary. And I don't need to go into all the details of that, but there's all these obstacles there that they see. And so they're like, no, we're not going. Except for 2 guys, Caleb and Joshua. They said, no, I believe we should do it. I believe that God is going to get us there and God is going to make a way. Even if it's difficult, even if it seems impossible, I believe if God's calling us to it, that we can do it. It's so amazing when we look at this because we think, okay, well, gosh, gee, you guys have no faith at all, right? God's calling you to this. Why don't you just do it? But when we look at it in the lens of what God calls us to do in our life, we think, oh, right? Like so often we may get to that point where we want more and we begin to ask God, through daily quiet times, through just really spending time alone with him or being quiet and thinking about, well, what could God be calling me to that's more? And we begin to see what that vision might be. And then we think, oh, wow, yeah, no, that's scary. Like I couldn't do that, or I don't want to do that, or that, how would that happen? Like, we begin to come up with all these excuses. And not every vision or idea that we have necessarily needs to come to fruition. And it may not come to fruition right now, but when we feel in our heart that God is calling us to do something, we have to have faith. We have to just accept and believe that even if we don't know how it's going to happen, step by step by step, God's going to get us there. When we're looking at this story in Numbers, there were these 2 obstacles that kept the people from seeing that greater vision, that wanting to go to that greater purpose, the better promised land. First of all, they said they wanted to return to their lives of slavery in Egypt, right? They were more afraid of this greater calling, this greater vision that God had given them than they had of being back to being slaves. And you say, well, why is that? Well, it's because being slaves was comfortable to them. So often we go back to these old habits, even though we don't want to, even though it's not ideal. But sometimes it's easier to stay where we are or to go back to the old familiar ways than to move forward into the good things that God has promised for us. So the question that they were forced to ask themselves, and we have to ask ourselves, is, are we willing to step into the potentially, maybe temporarily, uncomfortableness in order to discover the best? A really critical question that we have to be willing to take on the obstacles that are there and to battle, to fight for them. The people knew that if they were going to go there, they were going to have to fight for them. Joshua knew that. Caleb knew that, but they were willing to do it because they knew that God would give them the power. And if this is something that you struggle with, I just would consider you, first of all, to think about nature. And this is how God created our world around us, that change, that death, that transformation, it's part of our world. You think about the seasons and the leaves falling in fall and going into the ground and nourishing the ground so that things can grow up again in spring and bloom fully in summer, and then thing falling again in fall. Like it's cyclical, right? And the idea of a butterfly, the butterfly has a body that seems to be working just fine. And then all of a sudden it turns into a chrysalis and completely transforms itself and comes out to be a butterfly. So there's transformation and there's difficulty in that transformation. There's pain in that transformation. I mean, a caterpillar dissolves its entire body to become a butterfly. And when we are called to these great visions and to a greater purpose than just everyday living, it takes pain sometimes that we have to go through. But again, God is with us. God carries us with us and he walks with us. The other thing that I think kept them from wanting to go into this purpose was they thought, well, maybe this future is nice, but they didn't have faith that God could really bring them through the obstacles that it would require to get to that place of flowing milk and honey. So do you have faith that God really exists and that he has good plans for you? If you're in that place of saying, maybe God has more for me, but I don't really know if he can do it, or I don't even know what it is, I would encourage you to, first of all, read stories from the Bible of God's providence and his power. the parting of the Red Sea, the miraculous healings of Jesus, the walls of Jericho falling down. Psalms are filled with stories of proclamations from David and other people of saying, the Lord rescued me. The Lord is my strength. He's my song. Look at what he's done. Look at all the amazing miracles. It's just, the Bible is filled with those kind of miracles. And then I would also encourage you to reflect and write down those things in your life that really, where God has just shown up, and make it a practice of reflecting on him regularly and watching for him to show up daily. I cannot tell you how this practice has transformed my confidence in God and my faith in God. I've now incorporated it as part of what I do every morning when I spend time in God's word, because there are so many times when we're going through difficulty and we feel like we're called to more. We don't know how it's going to happen. There's all these questions. There's always questions in our life of how is this going to happen in the next stage, right? But the confidence to be able to take the tiny step, because that's all God's asking us to do, is take a tiny step, right? To take that tiny step to the next thing. So often I find my confidence comes from simply remembering God's power in the past and what he is doing right now, that he's with me, right? We hear God say over and over again in the Bible, do not be afraid. Go be brave. I am with you. Do not fear. I will be with you wherever you go. That knowledge is powerful, but it's so easy to forget that when we are surrounded by negativity, when we see horrible things happen to us, to our friends, to this world, and we think, where is God? But when we can reflect every day on where he is and see it every single day and use that as our strength to move forward towards his greater vision, it's amazing how that can transform us. So there's so much I want to tell you about how to discover life purpose, but for now, we have to start with the number one thing, that we have to create a foundation of spiritual hunger and growth. I encourage you to just say, God, I know there's more. I want to have more. Please, I pray you'd help me find more. And then to begin to seek him out. Like his word says, he promises that when we seek him, we will find him. That is his promise to us. So if you're struggling with survival living, today's action step is to get alone with God and to share all that you're feeling. And I'd encourage you to do this, to write 3 words that describe your current state. Are you fed up? Are you bored? Are you exhausted? Are you longing? Are you desperate? Are you just scared? What are you feeling? What are you feeling in this survival, I want more out of my life kind of mindset? And get it out there and share that with him and begin to think about, well, why do I feel like that? What is that in my life? You know, so often we ignore these sides of ourselves because we're just running, right? We're so busy. We don't even stop to think about it. But when we can do that, we begin to let things happen and we can begin to see God working. And it takes time. It takes time for this process to happen. It would be so awesome if God just texted us like, okay, hey, here's your purpose for today, right? Blah, 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 blah. But we can know for all of us, because of the Great Commission, ultimately our purpose is to tell other people about God, about his love, about a relationship with him, because that is the foundation of all purpose. So that we can start there, right? And then God reveals to us our individual purposes as we go. On the show notes page, I'm going to include some Bible verses that can be great for you to meditate on as you consider what more might mean for you. And if you want to find those show notes, you can go to vibrantchristianliving.com/2. That's the number 2. And I also want to be aware of that. You know, maybe you've never talked to God. Maybe you've never really thought about prayer or relationship with God. Like, what does that mean? I completely understand. And I want to help you discover that. So I'm going to be including a few articles on that show notes page that can help you understand what that even means and to give you some resources for that as well. So the next episode, we're going to talk about 5 spiritual growth habits and mindsets for that purposeful, vibrant living that's outside of survival mode. So it's kind of a next step as we talk about, well, where is purpose found? We're going to talk about, well, if it's found in God and he has great plans for us, how do we access that? I mean, that's kind of the natural next question, right? So I'm excited to share that with you. And again, please be sure to check out the show notes and to download any resources there that are helpful. I hope you have an awesome day. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. I'll see you on the next episode. Bye for now. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. If you were encouraged or inspired by what was shared today, I would love it if you could take 2 seconds and leave an honest review in iTunes. I love hearing from you, and these reviews help others find the podcast. And of course, be sure to subscribe to the show if you haven't already so you don't miss an episode. Bye for now, and I will see you back here next week.